"You really picked the wrong night to drive around here," the officer said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine like a blade that didn't need to be sharp to be felt. The red and blue lights washed over the windshield in slow, pulsing waves, turning the quiet parking lot into something colder, something staged. Marcus Reed kept both hands on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed but deliberate, the kind of stillness that came from control, not fear. The rideshare app on his phone still glowed faintly on the dashboard. The last trip marked complete just minutes ago. 2.3 miles, $8.75. Nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering. And yet somehow everything had shifted. Outside, three silhouettes moved with quiet coordination, boots crunching lightly over gravel, radios murmuring in low static bursts, the kind of background noise most people never noticed until it was the only thing left to hear. One officer stepped closer, flashlight beams sliding across the interior, lingering just a second too long on Marcus's face, as if trying to read something written beneath the skin. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, slower this time, like patience was a favor he could withdraw at any moment. Marcus inhaled once, steady and measured, the faint scent of pine air freshener mixing with the cool night air slipping through the cracked window. He didn't move right away, not because he refused, but because he was watching, listening, collecting. The way the second officer angled himself near the rear door, the third hovering just behind, not aggressive, not yet, but ready. It was a formation, not a coincidence. Somewhere in the distance, a highway roared softly, cars passing at 60, maybe 70 miles per hour, lives continuing uninterrupted just beyond the edge of this moment. Marcus blinked once, slow, grounding himself in the reflection of the dashboard light against the glass. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, voice even, respectful, but carrying something else beneath it, something that didn't bend. The question hung in the air for a fraction too long. The lead officer's jaw tightened, just slightly, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. "We'll ask the questions tonight," he replied, tone cooling by a degree, enough to be felt, not enough to be called out. The flashlight beam shifted again, tracing the outline of the empty passenger seat, the clean floor mats, the absence of anything that could justify what was unfolding. And still, they stayed. Still, they pressed in. Marcus's thumb brushed lightly against the edge of his steering wheel, a small, almost invisible motion, like a man reminding himself where he was. The night air carried a faint chill, maybe mid-50s, the kind that settled into your bones if you stood still too long. He finally reached for the door handle, not rushed, not hesitant, just precise. The click sounded louder than it should have, a small mechanical sound swallowed immediately by the quiet tension outside. As the door opened, the lights flared brighter across his chest, casting sharp shadows along his jacket, outlining him in alternating red and blue like a signal no one else could read. He stepped out slowly, shoes meeting the pavement with a soft, controlled weight, and for a brief second, everything seemed to pause, like the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus Reed stood under the wash of flashing lights, the colors sliding across his jacket in slow pulses, red then blue then red again, like a rhythm that did not belong to him. Up close, the officers looked younger than they first appeared, their faces set in practiced seriousness, the kind that came from repetition rather than reflection. The lead officer, Hayes, adjusted his stance slightly, one hand resting near his belt, not threatening, not relaxed either, just positioned in a way that suggested control. Marcus kept his posture open, shoulders squared but not rigid, hands visible at his sides, the cool night air brushing against his skin as if reminding him to stay present, to stay steady. "Where are you coming from?" Hayes asked, his tone measured but edged with something sharper beneath, like a question that already carried its own answer. Marcus glanced briefly toward his car, the rideshare decal still visible on the windshield, faint under the glare. "Just finished a ride," he said calmly. "Downtown pickup, short trip." Hayes nodded once, slow, as if confirming something only he could see, then circled slightly, his boots making soft contact with the pavement, each step deliberate. The second officer moved toward the rear of the vehicle, peering inside through the back window, while the third remained off to the side, watching Marcus with a quiet, unreadable expression. The radio on Hayes's shoulder crackled faintly, A burst of static followed, by a voice too distant to make out, and for a brief second, all three officers seemed to listen, not to the words, but to the authority behind them. Marcus noticed the glance they exchanged, quick, almost invisible, but there. Patterns. Always patterns. Step a little closer to the front of the vehicle, Hayes instructed, gesturing with 2 fingers, not raising his voice, not needing to. Marcus complied without hesitation, taking 2 measured steps forward, feeling the texture of the asphalt shift slightly under his shoes, small pebbles pressing against the sole in a way that grounded him more than the situation itself. The headlights from a passing car swept briefly across the lot, illuminating everything in a clean white flash before fading back into the alternating police lights. For a moment, the world felt normal again. Just another night, just another parking lot. Then it was gone. You carrying anything we should know about? Hayes asked, his eyes narrowing just enough to suggest expectation. Marcus met his gaze, steady, unflinching. No, sir. The word was deliberate, respectful, but it did not shrink him. Hayes studied him for a second longer than necessary, then exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound that seemed to signal a decision rather than a conclusion. Mind if we take a look inside your vehicle? He asked, though the phrasing felt less like a question and more like a step already in motion. Marcus paused. Not long, just enough to let the moment breathe. The wind moved faintly across the open lot, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the subtle rustle of something unseen. He could feel the weight of their attention, not heavy, but constant, like a spotlight that did not blink. Go ahead, he said finally, his voice even, almost neutral, as if the answer had been decided long before the question was asked. Hayes gave a small nod, then turned, signaling to the others without words. The second officer opened the rear door, the interior light flickering on, casting a soft glow over the empty seats, the clean upholstery, the absence of anything out of place. Nothing moved. Nothing revealed itself. And yet, no one stepped back. Marcus stood there, quiet, observant, his eyes tracking every motion, every glance, every pause, as if the night itself was unfolding exactly as expected, even if no one else could see why. The interior. Light from the open rear door cast a soft rectangle onto the pavement, pale and steady against the restless pulse of red and blue, and for a moment it felt like 2 different worlds overlapping without touching. One of order, quiet, predictable. The other uncertain, tightening, waiting for something to justify itself. The second officer leaned in slightly, shifting a few items that did not need shifting, running a hand along the seat as if texture alone might reveal intent, while the third stepped closer to Marcus, not enough to invade his space, but enough to narrow it. Hayes remained near the front of the vehicle, watching everything, not missing anything, his gaze moving between Marcus and the car like a man piecing together a story that refused to settle. You been driving long tonight? He asked, his tone casual on the surface, but structured underneath, each question building on the last, not random, not idle. Marcus let a breath move through him, slow and controlled, his chest rising just enough to be noticed if someone was paying attention. About 4 hours, he replied. Started around 8. Hayes nodded again, as if time itself was a detail worth weighing, then glanced briefly at the dashboard through the windshield, the faint glow of the phone screen still visible, the app waiting, always waiting. Busy night. Hayes continued, stepping closer now, closing the distance by a foot, maybe 2, subtle, but intentional. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, not retreating, just adjusting, maintaining the same grounded stance. It comes and goes, he said. Weeknights are unpredictable. The words were simple, ordinary, but his tone carried a steadiness that did not match the situation, and that contrast lingered in the air longer than the sentence itself. Behind them, the second officer straightened up from the back seat, closing the door halfway, but not fully, leaving it ajar like a thought left unfinished. He shook his head once toward Hayes, a small gesture, almost dismissive, but not enough to end anything. Hayes noticed. Of course he noticed. His jaw shifted slightly, the muscle tightening just beneath the skin, then relaxing again as he turned back to Marcus. Mind telling me where you are headed next? He asked. Not where you came from, where you are going. The difference sat between them, quiet but deliberate. Marcus looked past Hayes for a fraction of a second, toward the empty stretch of lot, the dim outline of a convenience store sign flickering in the distance, its light inconsistent, like it could go out at any moment. Wherever the next ride takes me, he answered. No hesitation. No elaboration. Hayes held his gaze, searching for something that did not present itself. Around them, the night seemed to narrow, the edges of sound pulling inward, the distant traffic fading just enough that the soft hum of the police radio became more pronounced, a low, constant presence threading through the silence. The third officer shifted his stance again, crossing his arms loosely, not aggressive, but settled, as if preparing to stay longer than expected. Time stretched in small increments, seconds stacking on top of each other without resolution. Marcus could feel it, the way the moment was being extended, not because there was something to find, but because nothing had been found yet. And still, they did not stop. Hayes exhaled slowly, then tilted his head just a degree, a subtle change that signaled movement without announcing it. "Turn around for me," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational, but final in a way that left no space for interpretation. The words landed without force, but they carried weight, the kind that did not need to be loud to be understood. Marcus did not react immediately, not out of resistance, but out of awareness. The air felt cooler now, or maybe it was just the shift in the moment, the way everything seemed to lean forward at once. He nodded once, slow, acknowledging, then began to turn, deliberate and unhurried, every movement controlled, every second accounted for, as if he had already seen how this would unfold long before the lights ever touched his windshield. Marcus completed the turn slowly, the motion controlled from his shoulders down to his feet, until he faced away from them, the flashing lights now stretching his shadow long across the pavement in alternating colors. The night air pressed lightly against the back of his neck, cool and steady, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and distant exhaust. Behind him, he could hear the subtle shift of fabric, the quiet repositioning of boots, the small, almost invisible choreography of authority settling into place. Hayes stepped closer, close enough now that his voice no longer needed to carry. "Place your hands behind your back," he said, calm. Precise, like a step in a process that had been decided before the first question was asked. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second, not resisting, not hesitating, just acknowledging the weight of the moment as it arrived exactly where it had been heading. Then he moved, bringing his hands back slowly, fingers relaxed, wrists aligned, offering compliance without surrendering composure. The metal clicked softly as it closed around his wrists, a clean, mechanical sound that echoed louder in the silence than it should have. Not forceful, not rushed, just final. The kind of sound that marked a line being crossed. Hayes adjusted the fit slightly, professional, efficient, not looking at Marcus's face, as if the action itself required no connection. The second officer stepped in closer, watching, while the third shifted toward the front of the vehicle again, scanning the surroundings, the empty lot, the distant flicker of the store sign, as if expecting something to interrupt. Nothing did. A car passed on the road beyond, headlights sweeping briefly across the scene, illuminating everything in stark white for a second before disappearing, leaving the red and blue to reclaim the space. Marcus stood still, his breathing even, his posture unchanged except for the position of his hands. There was no tension in his shoulders, no sudden movement, just a quiet presence that did not match what was happening to him. Hayes straightened, stepping back half a pace, finally looking at Marcus directly, studying him now, searching for something that still had not revealed itself. "You understand why you are being detained?" he asked, the question formal, almost routine, but edged with expectation, as if the answer might complete something. Marcus turned his head slightly, just enough to speak without fully facing him, the light catching the edge of his profile. "Do you?" he replied, his voice low, even, not confrontational, but carrying a clarity that settled into the air differently than anything said before. The words lingered. Hayes did not respond immediately. The second officer glanced at him, a brief look, uncertain, then looked away. The radio crackled again, louder this time, a voice breaking through with sharper urgency, though still indistinct, swallowed by static and distance. Hayes reached up instinctively, pressing the button on his shoulder, but hesitated before speaking, as if deciding whether to engage or ignore. For a moment, everything balanced on that pause. Marcus remained still, eyes forward now, watching the reflection of the lights on the hood of his car, the way they moved without changing anything beneath them. The third officer returned from the front of the vehicle, stepping into place again, his expression tighter than before, something shifting beneath the surface, subtle but real. Hayes lowered his hand from the radio, exhaling slowly, then looked back at Marcus, his gaze sharper now, more focused, as if the absence of evidence had only deepened his resolve. "We are going to sort that out," he said, the words controlled, but carrying a weight that suggested this was not finished. Not even close. And still, Marcus did not react. Not outwardly. He simply stood there, hands secured behind him, the night moving around him in quiet currents, as if he was waiting for something that had not yet arrived, but was already on its way. The night did not move forward. It tightened, like a breath held too long, like something waiting just beneath the surface of sound. Marcus stood exactly where they had placed him, hands secured behind his back, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, his attention not on the officers, but on the space between moments, the quiet details most people missed when pressure began to build. Hayes shifted his weight again, subtle but restless now, his earlier certainty thinning at the edges, replaced by something harder to name. Not doubt. Not yet. But something close enough to unsettle. "Run his information," he said, his voice low but firm, directed toward the second officer, who had already reached for the tablet clipped to his vest. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow across his face as he began entering details, each tap precise, routine, practiced. Name, vehicle, plate. The system responded in silence, processing, searching, cross-referencing. The kind of quiet that felt heavier than noise. Marcus listened without turning his head, tracking the rhythm of their movements, the cadence of their breathing, the slight delay between action and response. The third officer stepped back half a pace, scanning the perimeter again, but his eyes kept returning, drawn back to Marcus, as if something about him did not align with the situation unfolding. "You are awfully calm for someone in this position," Hayes said after a moment, his tone less controlled now, curiosity slipping through where authority had been. Marcus let a small breath leave him, barely visible, more felt than seen. "I have been in positions like this before," he replied, his voice even, grounded, carrying no trace of tension. Hayes studied him more closely now, the way a person looks when something does not fit, when expectation and reality begin to separate. "Doing what?" Hayes asked, stepping slightly closer again, narrowing the space not with force, but with focus. Marcus did not answer immediately. The pause stretched, deliberate, measured, not evasive, but intentional. The tablet chimed softly, a notification tone that cut cleanly through the air. The second officer's eyes shifted across the screen, scanning, then stopping, then scanning again. His brow furrowed, just slightly, a small crease forming where none had been before. "Something wrong?" Hayes asked, without looking away from Marcus. The officer with the tablet hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. "System is still loading," he said, but the words lacked the confidence of routine. Hayes turned his head now, finally breaking eye contact, glancing toward the screen. "It does not take this long," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, a burst of static followed by a voice trying to push through, urgent but fragmented. The third officer reached for his own radio instinctively, adjusting the volume, listening harder now. Marcus remained still, his gaze drifting briefly toward the reflection of the flashing lights on the side mirror of his car, the way they repeated themselves endlessly, over and over, without change, without progress. Hayes stepped closer to the second officer, peering at the tablet, his expression tightening as he read whatever was appearing there. The glow of the screen reflected faintly in his eyes, and for the first time since the stop began, something shifted. Not outwardly, not fully, but enough. "Run it again," Hayes said, quieter now, controlled, but edged with something new. The officer nodded, tapping quickly, refreshing, re-entering, as if repetition might correct whatever had surfaced. The wind moved through the lot again, colder now, brushing against Marcus's face, lifting the edge of his jacket slightly. He closed his eyes for just a second, not in resistance, not in fear, but in recognition, like a man who had been waiting for a moment to arrive and had just felt it begin. Behind him, the radio finally broke through clearly, a voice cutting across the static with unmistakable authority, calling out a code that did not belong to routine traffic stops, a tone that did not ask, but instructed. Hayes froze, just for a second, his hand hovering near the radio, the tablet still glowing in front of him, the night no longer unfolding the way it had been just moments before. The voice on the radio did not repeat itself. It did not need to. It carried a weight that settled into the space immediately, flattening the tension in a way that no command on the scene had managed to do so far. Hayes's hand hovered near his shoulder mic, fingers curled but not pressing, his posture caught between action and hesitation, as if the next move no longer belonged entirely to him. The second officer stared at the tablet, the glow from the screen reflecting sharper now across his face, his earlier uncertainty deepening into something more defined, something closer to concern. That code. Did you hear that? The third officer said quietly, not taking his eyes off Marcus, his voice lower than before, stripped of the casual authority it had carried at the start of the stop. Hayes did not answer right away. His gaze moved slowly from the tablet to Marcus, then back again, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same moment that no longer aligned. The night seemed to shift, not in sound or light, but in weight, the air itself feeling denser, heavier, pressing inward. Marcus remained still, his breathing steady, his eyes forward, not watching them now, but listening, the way someone listens when confirmation is no longer needed, only arrival. The radio crackled again, clearer this time, the voice sharper, controlled, repeating the directive with precision, each word landing cleanly, leaving no room for interpretation. Hayes pressed the mic this time, finally responding, but his voice had changed, the edge softened, replaced by something more measured. Unit on scene, he said, choosing each word carefully. We have a subject detained, awaiting clarification. The response came almost immediately, not louder, but unmistakably firm, instructing, not requesting. The second officer swallowed subtly, his thumb hovering over the tablet screen as if unsure whether to continue or stop. Sir, he began, then paused, glancing toward Hayes, waiting. Hayes stepped closer to the screen again, his eyes narrowing as he read, then widening just slightly. A reaction so small it could have been missed if not for the silence surrounding it. He exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but heavier than before, then looked back at Marcus, really looked this time, not as a subject, not as a problem to solve, but as something he had not fully understood until now. Marcus turned his head just enough to meet his gaze, his expression unchanged, calm, grounded, not triumphant, not defensive, simply present. The flashing lights continued their cycle, red then blue then red again. But they felt different now, less like control, more like a signal repeating after the message had already been delivered. The third officer shifted again, uncrossing his arms, his stance loosening as uncertainty replaced structure, his eyes moving between Hayes and Marcus, waiting for direction that no longer seemed as clear as before. The wind passed through the lot once more, colder now, brushing against the open door of the car, causing it to move just slightly on its hinge, a soft creak breaking through the layered silence. Hayes lowered his hand from the radio, his shoulders settling, not in confidence, but in recognition, like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was not as stable as he believed. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The system that had been driving the moment forward seemed to pause, suspended between what had been assumed and what was now undeniable. And in that stillness, Marcus stood exactly as he had from the beginning, hands secured, posture steady, his presence unchanged, as if the entire night had been leading here, not for him to react, but for them to finally see. The radio fell silent, but the silence it left behind was not empty. It was filled with meaning, with confirmation, with something that had already shifted the balance before anyone on the scene could fully process it. Hayes stood still, the weight of the moment settling into his posture, his earlier authority no longer sharp, no longer automatic, replaced by a careful awareness that seemed to slow everything down. The tablet remained in the second officer's hands, its glow steady now, no longer flickering with uncertainty, the information on it no longer incomplete, no longer ambiguous. He looked up at Hayes, this time not waiting for instruction, but for acknowledgement. His expression tightened, controlled, but unmistakably different from before. "Sir, this is not a standard return," he said quietly, choosing his words with precision, as if even speaking them required adjustment. Hayes did not respond immediately. His eyes moved back to Marcus, and for the first time, the way he looked at him had changed entirely. Not as a subject, not as a situation, but as something that had been misread from the beginning. "What does it say?" the third officer asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier confidence, replaced by a cautious edge that had not been there before. The second officer hesitated, just for a second, then turned the screen slightly, so Hayes could see more clearly. The reflection of the display caught in Hayes's eyes, and whatever he read there did not shock him outwardly, but it landed, deeply, altering something internal, something that did not show immediately, but could not be undone. His jaw tightened, then released, his breathing slowing as if recalibrating. The radio crackled once more, this time not fragmented, not distant, but direct, the voice unmistakable in tone and authority. "All units on scene, stand down immediately. Repeat, stand down. Subject is Federal. Internal Affairs Division. Do not proceed further." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled into the space with finality, leaving no room for interpretation, no room for resistance. The third officer exhaled softly, almost involuntarily, his stance loosening as if something he had been holding unconsciously had just been released. The second officer lowered the tablet slightly, his grip adjusting, his eyes shifting between Hayes and Marcus, waiting for the moment to resolve itself. Hayes remained still for a beat longer, just one, but it stretched, heavy with realization. Then slowly, he stepped forward, closing the distance again, but this time without the same posture, without the same intention. He reached toward Marcus's wrists, his movements careful, deliberate, the click of metal releasing softer than when it had been applied, as if even the sound itself understood the shift. Marcus did not move. He did not react. His hands came free, but his posture remained unchanged, grounded, steady, as if nothing about him needed to adjust to what had just been revealed. Hayes stepped back slightly, his hands lowering, his gaze steady but no longer commanding. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The flashing lights continued behind them, but they no longer defined the scene, they simply existed within it. The second officer turned off the tablet screen, the glow disappearing, leaving only the ambient light of the night and the steady pulse of red and blue. The third officer looked away briefly, scanning the empty lot again, but this time not searching for threat, not expecting interruption, just absorbing what had happened. Hayes finally spoke, his voice quieter now, measured, no longer carrying the same certainty as before. "Sir," he began, the word different this time, not procedural, not automatic, but intentional. Marcus turned his head slightly, meeting his gaze again, his expression unchanged, calm, composed, present. The power in the moment had shifted completely, not with force, not with volume, but with truth, revealed not through action, but through stillness. And in that stillness, everything that had been assumed before quietly fell apart. Hayes's voice did not continue right away, the single word he had spoken still hanging between them, heavier than anything that had come before it. The title had shifted in his mouth, no longer routine, no longer automatic, but deliberate, chosen. He straightened slightly, not to regain control, but to regain balance, as if the ground beneath the moment had changed and he needed to adjust to it. "I was not aware," he said finally, each word measured, careful, stripped of the earlier certainty that had driven every action up to this point. It was not an excuse. It did not try to be. It simply existed, incomplete, insufficient, but honest in a way that had not been present before. Marcus did not respond immediately. He flexed his fingers once, slowly, feeling the circulation return, the faint imprint of the cuffs still present but already fading, like a mark that would not last, but would not be forgotten either. He looked at Hayes fully now, not from beneath the lights, not from the position they had placed him in, but as an equal in the space that remained. "You were not supposed to be aware," Marcus said, his tone calm, even, not accusatory, not forgiving, simply stating what was true. The words settled differently than anything else that had been said that night. They did not escalate. They did not defend. They revealed. Hayes absorbed them without interruption, his expression tightening slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition, as if a piece of the situation had finally aligned in a way that made sense. Behind him, the second officer shifted his stance again, lowering his gaze briefly, the tablet now inactive in his hands, no longer a tool, just an object. The third officer exhaled slowly, looking out toward the empty lot, the flickering sign, the quiet stretch of road beyond, as if trying to place himself back into a version of the night that no longer existed. The flashing lights continued, but they felt distant now, like something happening outside the moment rather than defining it. Hayes ran a hand briefly along the side of his vest, a small, grounding motion, then looked back at Marcus. "This stop, it will be documented," he said, his voice steadier now, though not stronger, as if strength had been replaced by responsibility. Marcus gave a slight nod, acknowledging, not agreeing, not disagreeing, simply accepting the statement for what it was. "It already is," he replied. Hayes held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, a small motion, but one that carried more weight than any command he had given earlier. The second officer stepped back fully now, creating space that had not existed before, while the third moved toward the patrol car, reaching in to adjust the radio, lowering the volume, the crackle fading into the background. The night began to breathe again, the distant traffic returning to awareness, the soft hum of the city re-entering the edges of the scene. Marcus turned slightly toward his vehicle, the open door still waiting, the interior lights still on, unchanged, untouched by everything that had just unfolded outside of it. He paused for a moment, his hand resting lightly against the door frame, not yet stepping in, not yet leaving. Hayes watched him, not stopping him, not guiding him, simply present in the space that remained. "Is there anything else you need from us?" Hayes asked, the question careful, stripped of authority, carrying something closer to accountability. Marcus considered it for a brief second, then shook his head once, slow, deliberate. "No," he said. "Nothing more. No demand. No correction. Just closure." Hayes stepped back another half pace, giving him room without announcing it, the movement quiet but clear. The balance had shifted completely now, not through force, not through confrontation, but through understanding that had arrived too late to prevent the moment, but not too late to define what came after it. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, the fabric of the seat settling under his weight, the familiar space grounding him again. The interior light dimmed as the door closed, sealing the moment inside the past, leaving only the reflection of red and blue across the glass, fading slowly, as if even the lights understood it was time to let go. The engine turned over with a soft, familiar hum, steady and controlled, the kind of sound that grounded everything back into something real, something ordinary. Marcus rested his hands lightly on the steering wheel, fingers settling into place as if nothing had happened, as if the last several minutes had not reshaped the air around him. Outside, the red and blue lights still pulsed, but they no longer pressed inward, no longer defined the space. They simply existed, fading into the background like a signal that had already served its purpose. Hayes stood a few feet away, his posture no longer rigid, no longer commanding, but still, watching, not with suspicion, not with authority, but with something quieter, something reflective. The other two officers had stepped back fully now, their positions no longer forming a barrier, no longer closing in, but opening, creating space where there had been none before. The night stretched out again, wide and uninterrupted, the distant highway carrying its steady flow of motion, cars passing at speed, unaware, untouched. Marcus glanced once toward the side mirror, catching the reflection of the lights one last time, the colors moving across the glass in slow repetition, then fading as his focus shifted forward. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He simply placed the vehicle into drive, the motion smooth, deliberate, like everything else about him. The tires rolled softly over the pavement, a quiet sound that marked movement without drawing attention, without needing to. As the car began to move, Hayes took a small step back, not out of instruction, not out of protocol, but out of understanding, clearing the path without saying a word. For a brief second, Their eyes met again through the window, not as officer and subject, not as authority and compliance, but as two people standing on opposite sides of a moment that had already passed, yet would not be forgotten. Marcus gave a slight nod, not acknowledgement of what had been done, but of what had been seen. Hayes returned it, just as small, just as deliberate. No apology followed. None was spoken, but something in the space between them had shifted enough that words would not have added to it. The patrol car lights dimmed slightly as one of the officers reached inside and adjusted the controls, the intensity lowering, the scene unwinding piece by piece. The radio was quiet now, the earlier urgency replaced by routine silence, as if the system itself had moved on. Marcus guided the car toward the edge of the lot, the headlights stretching forward across the asphalt, illuminating a clear path ahead. The flickering sign in the distance steadied for a moment, then flickered again, its light uneven but persistent, like something that refused to go out completely. As he reached the exit, he paused just long enough to check the road, a simple, habitual motion, then eased forward, merging into the flow of traffic, becoming part of the movement that never stopped. Behind him, the lot returned to stillness, the officers remaining in place for a moment longer, not speaking, not moving, as if absorbing the silence that followed after everything else had been said without words. The night closed gently around the space he left behind, the air settling, the lights fading, the moment folding into memory. And ahead, the road stretched on, open and unmarked, carrying him forward without resistance, without noise, just the quiet rhythm of tires against pavement and the steady breath of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to change everything.